Some of my favorite and most memorable builds are the ones where I don't actually have a good plan going into it. So Nicole asked me to build a shoe rack, and I wanted to maximize the space, get as many shelves as possible, and as long as it satisfied that function, she doesn't really care what it looks like, which means I have free reign to just experiment and do some fun things and probably overcomplicate the crap out of it. And that's exactly what this is here. It's just a fairly simple shoe rack where each of the shelves has two tenons that go through these mortises and they kind of peek out on the outside edges. But there's a lot of angles that just kind of play well together, and I honestly don't even know for sure that I absolutely love it, but it was super fun to build. This is not something I expect a lot of you to make, so I don't really have a plan for it, but I think you might be interested in seeing how it goes together because there's a lot of little techniques that I think you could take into your shop and make some cool stuff with. All right, so let's get to it. I have some nice wide African mahogany boards that'll be perfect for the shelves, as well as some curly maple for the legs. The mahogany boards are too wide for my jointer, but fortunately they're already pretty straight and flat, so after cutting them to rough length, I'll be able to skip plane them. I'll take a light pass on one face of each board, knocking down the high spots. I can then flip them over and take a light pass on the other face. The process is repeated until the final thickness is achieved. Starting with fairly flat boards to begin with, this method results in boards that are passable. Not perfect, but they'll work on this project. The shelf boards are then jointed and trimmed to width at the table saw. The shelves actually get narrower as they go up. All four shelves are the same length, so I can use the same setup at the table saw for all of them. There are two legs on each side, so I'll rip the curly maple in half, giving the legs a nice grain match. I'll mark them as sets so that I don't get them confused later. Milling heavily figured wood can be tricky, but thankfully I have a helical head in both my Powermatic jointer and planer, so the surface is just about as close to perfect as you can expect. The legs will feature through mortises for the shelves. I'll use a template with a guide bushing and a 3/8 bit on my router. Boop! The template is made from 1/2 inch MDF. The main platform consists of two pieces separated by a 1/2 inch strip. When the pieces are brought together, we want the guide bushing to slide in the opening with no slop. See that? That's slop. That's no bueno. Now using a hand plane, I'll sneak up on a nice snug fit. That's much better. Now I can cut the strip into two smaller pieces. I'll put them back between the platforms with the distance between them being my desired mortise length, plus the offset of the guide bushing. The mortises are a fixed distance from the inside of the legs, so I'll be adding a fence later. For now, I'll locate the first strip about 2 inches in from the end. That's the start of the mortise slot. I then measure from my biggest mortise and strike another line. And this is how the pieces should line up. My longest mortise is 2.5 inches, so the opening is an 1/8 inch larger to account for a 1/16 inch guide bushing offset on both ends. A little glue on the parts and I can get this template together. After the glue dries, I use a sanding block to flatten the surface. To locate the fence, I carefully measure back from the start of the mortise and strike a line. My fence is then glued in place. When I'm in a rush, I like to use both CA glue and wood glue. The CA glue gives me an immediate bond so that the fence doesn't move, and as the wood glue dries, the bond of the fence becomes much stronger. Now I'll carefully lay out the center line of the jig. This is crucial for alignment as everything I do will be based off of the center lines. Because my mortises get shorter with each shelf as we go up, I'll need to cut 3 spacers. The 1/4 inch, 1/2 inch, and 3/4 inch spacer will allow me to use the same template to create 4 different mortises. Going back to my drawing, I measure for the center line of the bottom mortise and mark it on the legs. I'll continue this process laying out the remaining mortises on their center lines. Before routing, I wax up my router base and template to help eliminate friction. To make the mortises, I line up the center line of the template with the center line of the mortise. Because it's going to be difficult to clamp perfectly, I'll use blue tape and CA glue to stick the template in place so that it doesn't move. A couple of holdfasts keep the whole assembly from moving, and a sacrificial board underneath helps prevent tear out. The mortise is then routed 1/4 inch pass at a time. Resist the urge to do it all at once even if you think the bit can take the abuse. Because the guide bushing blocks the air path, dust collection is pretty ineffective. If you keep routing the mortise with all that sawdust jammed in there, the bit will chatter and jump, and your mortise is going to look like duty. So take light passes and suck out the dust after each pass. The template just pops right off, and the tape is easily removed. Those little fuzzies are easy enough to sand away, but this is why I put my show face, the outside of the leg, facing down. Look at how clean that edge is. To cut the next mortise up, I'll pop in my smallest spacer. This will shorten the length of the mortise by 1/4 inch. The clamping and routing process is exactly the same. Just don't accidentally suck up the spacers. The process is a bit tedious since I have 16 mortises to cut and each set requires a template modification, but I don't have anything better to do at the moment, so I may as well be doing this. I don't like the look of rounded through tenons, so I'm going to square off these mortises. I'll start by chiseling from the inside non-show face. I could be a little bit sloppy here because this is the side that won't be seen. On the show face, however, I'll use a marking knife to define the corners perfectly, and then carefully chisel back to the lines. Could I have used a hollow chisel mortiser for these mortises instead? Yeah, but I never really get clean results with my mortiser, so I just don't trust it on a highly visible mortise like this. With a square inserted from the inside face, I want to make sure that the ruler makes contact with the very edge of the show side of the mortise. If it doesn't, I still have some material to remove below that point. To make the shelf tenons, I'll start by double checking the length. I'll set the cutting gauge so that the tenons sit slightly proud of the surface. I can then scribe all of my shelf boards. With the dado stack installed at the table saw, I can use a sled to cut the shoulders. Just to get the setup worked out, I'll do a very conservative test cut. You can see the tenon is far too thick, so I'll raise the blade and try again. I take my time, sneaking up on a fit that's just a bit too snug. For a through mortise, I prefer the tenon to be snug at this point so that I can finesse the perfect fit later. We also have boards that aren't dead flat, so there's always a chance that the tenon isn't a perfect consistent thickness. Back at the workbench, I'll use a router plane to finesse the final fit. I cut a mortise in a test board and then cut away a chunk of material so that I could use this thing as a size gauge. It's still too snug. Once the test mortise just barely slides onto the tenon, I'm done. The shelves won't have one giant tenon. Instead, they'll have two tenons spaced so that the legs will have a 1-inch gap between them. That strip of mahogany is just there as a spacer. I'll take a piece of scrap, cut to fit perfectly between the mortises, and draw a center line on it. With a center line on my shelf tenon, I can use the block as a setup gauge. The block represents the exact gap that we need between the two tenons. I can use the bandsaw to make the initial cuts. The fence helps provide repeatability and symmetry, so I can make the cuts on both ends. Now for the extremely manual part of this process. I stand the shelf up on one leg set and then line up the cut lines. From there, I can carefully mark the other end of the tenons with a pencil. I'll extend the lines, and then make the cuts at the bandsaw. I'm going to be conservative here. The bandsaw can also be used to remove the bulk of the waste. With the shelf back in position, you can see my pencil lines and the material that still needs to be removed. A little paring action should help me sneak up on the fit. Once both tenons look like they're going to drop in, I can go back and clean up the shoulders. I'll carefully pare away the material, using the shoulder as a reference surface. These paring cuts are better than chopping because they leave a cleaner surface. And parts of this end-grain shoulder will be visible in a final assembly, so we want it to look clean. After cutting all those tenons, I couldn't wait to do a dry assembly, so I went back out to the shop after the kids were in bed just to see if everything fits. Looks like it does. So now I can go back to watching Seinfeld. The next day, as I take this thing apart, I realize the importance of a good assembly and disassembly strategy. Since the mortising work is done, I can start to add the details to the legs, starting with a big taper. I'm making decisions as I go along, so I'm going to do a bunch of dry assemblies here. I'll mark the inside and outside edges with a pencil. In the center, that shows me the area that'll be visible after assembly, so I can sand that nice and smooth. On the outsides, I'll measure an additional 1/4 inch so that the shelf sits proud of the legs. From there, I'll draw a curve, because I like some curvy. To make things even more complicated, I'll cut the curve at a bevel angle that matches the taper angle of the legs. I can only attempt this because I'm wearing flannel, otherwise I wouldn't even think about it. The curve is smoothed at the spindle sander and then finessed at the workbench. A block plane does a pretty nice job when there's lots of material to remove, and a flexible sanding strip can do the final smoothing. A good sharp scraper is an asset here too. The first curve can then be used to lay out the curves of the remaining shelves. Each one will go through the same cutting and shaping process. I'd love to just use a flush trim bit to copy the curves, but because of that bevel angle, I can't. Thanks, flannel. Since the tenons sit proud of the surface, they'll need a little bit of love on the edges. I'll add a small, soft chamfer. The final smoothing of the panels starts with a good scraping and then 150 grit sanding. The edges are knocked down using a block plane and some sanding. So I've done a quick little dry assembly here, and I want to show you a detail that didn't turn out exactly the way that I hoped it would, and what I'm going to do about it. So unfortunately, these boards, I had drawn everything up at 4.5 inches, and my boards only allowed me to get 4.25. So what that wound up doing was taking some material from the tapered side, and it knocked my mortise and tenon joints further off balance. So you see how much material I have here to the right of the tenon, and there's not much here to the left. So I want to visually balance that out a little bit, but I don't want to thin out my legs too much. So I think what I'm going to do is just peel off maybe a 1/4 inch from the inside edge here, and hopefully rebalance this just a little bit. It's not the end of the world. I'm just, having fun with this project. It's a very low pressure project. So if it's not 100% what I wanted it to be, I'm okay with that. To cut the 1/4 inch off, I'll use the taper offcut from earlier in the project to help keep the leg nice and straight against the fence. A little masking tape holds it in place. And this is why we never throw away offcuts until the project is done. To add some additional details, I'll use a bevel gauge to find the approximate tangential angle at the end of the shelf. I'll cut that same angle into my legs as a bevel, almost as if the curve just continues straight through the legs. It's a little detail that most won't even notice, but I find this stuff fun. At the top of the legs, I'll cut a slight taper downward toward the middle. With the rack dry assembled one last time, I add the finishing touches, easing all of the exposed edges. Everything can then be sanded to remove all the milling marks in preparation for finish. I don't often get the chance to finish before assembly, but in this case, it makes a lot of sense. If I keep the finish off the tenon cheeks and the mortises, I shouldn't have any issues. I'm applying a hard wax oil that gets wiped on very thin. Once coated, I go back over the surface with a buffer outfitted with a terry cloth polishing bonnet. Check out the figure on that maple. The mahogany is no slouch either. I love that deep red color. For assembly, I need as much time as I can get, so I'm going with Titebond's liquid hide glue. My glue application is very strategic. I want the glue only on the base of the tenon. This way, when I insert it into the mortise, the tenon will poke out, and I won't have any glue to clean up. And this is where the long open time really comes in handy, as all of these mortise and tenon joints slowly hit home, one tap at a time. Most of the joints are fully closed, but I'll use a couple of clamps here and there just to close up any gaps that I see. All right, so here it is, finish applied, and it is ready for some boots, shoes, slippers, all kinds of fun stuff. Ultimately, my goal with this was to have fun and to experiment and to practice some techniques that maybe I haven't done in a little while and just exercise a little bit of creativity. I'm not actually so worried about the end product as long as it serves its function. It was really the journey on this one that I thought was important to me. So even though I don't have a plan, I'd like to know from you guys, if you like this kind of a build, let me know in the comments, because this is a little bit easier for me. I'm just kind of freewheeling, having fun with it. And if you like that presentation style, I'm happy to do more stuff like this in the future. Just let me know. All right, thanks for watching, everybody. And I hope you get an opportunity to just go into the shop, no pressure, and just build whatever comes to mind. It's a lot of fun. Take care.